Hello, everyone. Welcome to FDH Lounge mini episode 1801. You have with you today FDH Lounge managing partner Rick Morris, along with FDH Lounge dignitary and FDH Hoops analyst Ben Chu. We are here to celebrate the 18th anniversary of the FDH Lounge. And through the course of mini episodes 1800 to 1802, we're taking a look at, in this order, the second half of the decade, kind of previewing it in news, in sports, and in entertainment. I'm going to refer everyone back to the opening minutes of mini episode 1800 for our salute to the original FDH Lounge dignitaries and also to the panel that we've had in this space from 2020 to 2022 and also in 2024. Specifically right now, we're talking about sports. We're talking about the big stories over the course of the rest of the decade. And some of the ones, I think, on the news side, it's a little more speculative as far as what are going to be the things right now. I don't know if we can quite see down the horizon to see that. But with the sports ones, it looks to me like it's just the continuation of trends here. And you had texted me the other day about venue sports, surprisingly not going forward in the aftermath of Disney settling with Fubo on that they're not going to do it after all, probably because Warner Media doesn't have the NBA. They're not really bringing anything to the table here. ESPN is pushing in all the chips on a standalone ESPN deal here. So far more than like in the early days of the lounge, when it was HBO Go that came out, Showtime as a over-the-top thing. ESPN doing that's the big one. That's the one we've been waiting for. It's still going to take a while to fully unravel the cable bundle. It's not going to happen immediately. This has been very, very slow motion. If you'd told us in 2020, way back when, it'll take until 2025 for ESPN to spin off onto its own thing and not be exclusive to cable and satellite, we wouldn't have believed you. But it's taken this long, and that shows me that it's going to take as long to fully kind of play out as far as the further unraveling of the cable bundle. But here we are. This is the moment of truth for ESPN. They've been planning for this thing for, the lounge has been around 18 years. Probably the vast majority of the time we've been doing a show, they've been planning for this.
Right, and I think the big discussion with ESPN now, like the initial start date is planned to be August 2025.
Mm-hmm.
So they got about roughly, I know they've been previously working on it, but they only got around about 6 months at this point to try and get everything in line. And it's going to be very interesting because ESPN seems to be one of the few reasons why people still pay for cable television or pay for YouTube TV or Hulu Plus Live TV or Fubo. Those seem to be the major. Sports is the last bastion of why anyone would necessarily need those services. And if ESPN finds the right price point, they're going to spin off a lot of those viewers. And we also are in a world, too, where we discussed this in the news area. The economic factors in America right now, a lot of people are feeling the pinch. And when you're feeling the pinch of the money, you're going to just find ways to choose other things. Like I've seen scenarios where I've had friends tell me they love the NFL, they love the NBA, but they're not going to pay $70, $80 to Hulu or YouTube TV. Just for sports programming. It's a legitimate question that we're seeing a mass fragmentation at this time of sports fan. And it almost feels like to me, Rick, as if we're looking at ESPN spinning their own thing off. If it's healthy and it's a successful service, then we're going to start to have people start to question, why do we need certain things? Because essentially the only thing that I would assume a sports fan would need at that point would be YouTube TV for NFL Sunday Ticket. And if you're not an NFL fan, I feel like you can cobble together everything else to get your sports at that period of time.
Yeah, I think so. And this is one of these things here, too, and to harken back to the news area when we were talking about inflation as one of the big stories of the first half of the decade and what will happen in the battle against inflation in the second half of the decade. One wonders to some degree, and I don't know that I haven't thought of it this way until now because I haven't really had a chance to process the whole decision to shutter venue sports just because it was like, what did you settle the lawsuit for? I mean, I still don't understand that.
Essentially, at least from my knowledge and at least from my sources, they essentially said that this was a move to consolidate the brand and to increase their Hulu Plus Live TV capturing of the audience and allow for Fubo. It's a win for them because they were in the red financially. They had not been doing well the last couple of years.
Right.
And it allows them to put together maybe their own little skinny bundle of ESPN and Fox content down the line to get people to join their service. So it felt like it was a win-win, but I think we all suspected when the chip fell, when David Zaslav said those words about the NBA, that after WBD lost the NBA, ESPN probably became very proactive in why do we need you as part of this group, because Fox has some of the NFL, but at the time, the only thing really missing from the service for essentially for WBD, the only thing they had to offer really was, AEW wrestling, NHL, and baseball, which are all, at least in America right now, pretty niche sports. So it's going to be very interesting to see how WBD reacts, especially with their own sort of in-app for Bleacher Report. We've seen them delay. There was a period of timeline for the last 3 or 4 years. The last 3 years when they created it, that they were eventually going to move it over to a fully paid, like this was an add-on feature.
Right.
Well, it's been 3 years now. It's still not an add-on feature. Everyone's still getting it for free. So the question I think we're going to start to ask is, what is the value? And also, we got to talk about acquisition. WBD has been an acquisition target for the last couple of months.
They have been, yeah. And, by the way, they also picked up some surplus Big 12 sports from ESPN, so let's not forget that. But this is where, like I said, recording with you now, it's sort of hitting me because I haven't really processed the whole thing yet. But here's what I now suspect in light of the things we've talked about thus far today. And that is that I think inflation and consumer sentiments probably had something to do with this, because you and I always kind of wonder, like, what's the price point on this thing going to be? And it was just like, I think I heard it bandied about at one point. It might be like $42.99 or whatever. But
yeah, the initial price was supposed to be for Venu. It was supposed to be
$44.99. Okay, and that's a split. Maybe not a three-way split evenly, but a split between ESPN, Fox, and between Warner Media. All right, so what is it going to cost for ESPN on its own? I mean, that's probably going to be at least $29.99 or whatever. So they're looking at this.
That's my initial thought on the price point, yeah.
Yeah, so they're looking.
I feel like for them, the sweet spot, because this is the first time that ESPN will be offering their entire library with channels.
Exactly.
Like, that's the big thing I think a lot of people don't understand. Is like with the ESPN Plus, it gets a lot of sports.
Right.
There's a lot of things that do not necessarily carry over. Some at Monday Night Football, some doesn't carry over. The NBA sometimes doesn't carry over.
Mm-hmm.
Some baseball I've seen occasionally also doesn't get carried over.
Right.
So it's going to be interesting. And I also know too that there are enough sports fans out there that are looking for a cheaper alternative. And ironically, in the timeline where both Hulu plus Live TV and YouTube TV and Fubo are all increasing their prices.
Right.
ESPN has the opportunity to undercut a lot of those people, because there has to be at least, I would argue, 25% subscriber bases for those platforms that are only there for sports and no other channel watching at that period of time.
Yeah. And this is something where I'm looking at it like ESPN's probably looking at it like, we can take everything, right, at $29.99, or we can split Venue, our share, their share of $44.99. So that's where this is kind of hitting me for the first time, that I think that's probably what it was. They probably reconfigured on that because of what consumer sentiment is right now. People are getting squeezed on costs, and that like, and also too, are people with everything that ESPN has, which would be sort of disproportionate under that bundle there, because Fox is going to bring you some other stuff, but you're not going to get the NFL games through that. That's a separate deal altogether. You're not going to get Fox NFL games. So
at that time they were going to get Fox NFL games.
Was that going to be okay? Well, that would have that would have helped.
Discussion across the board that each of those channels that associated essentially TNT, TBS.
Okay.
Fox and Fox Sports FS1, FS2, those are all essentially going to be bundled in the Venu scenario.
Okay. All right. So that's a scenario where, again, are the other ones bringing enough things to the table where anybody out there is going to be like, well, I was going to do Venue if you brought in these other two, but now I'm not going to. The number of people that are going to not subscribe to ESPN because of that versus the number of people that are going to be like, oh, ESPN at a price point that I like as opposed to the $44.99 the other way. I think we know which way that the scale falls for that one. So probably a good decision for ESPN. And like I said, we'll have to see how some of the other business things play out with that, because you would not have gotten me to believe that they would both settle the lawsuit with Fubo and then also turn around and, not do Venue. I thought it was all to try to clear the way for Venue. So we've got a lot of the TV deals locked in on a sport level for the major sports over the course of the next couple of years. What we do not have, what is very much in flux and what is going to be one of the big stories of the second half of the decade in sports, the local teams, the individual teams, the NBA, MLB, NHL, seeing how that goes. And I've talked about this with you off air, that like in the Dallas market alone, you've got the Mavericks doing a direct-to-consumer deal where you pay to subscribe to it. You've got the Stars doing one that is completely ad-supported. And by the way, I'm sure there's probably also ads on the Mavericks one that you're paying to watch as well. So you're looking at two different models of how to go about this. Everybody is figuring this out in real time. In the Cleveland market, you've got the Cleveland baseball team that clawed back its rights from what is now FanDuel Sports, and there's been no announcement yet on setting up any kind of new entity. Spring training just a couple of weeks away. Presumably they'll figure out something at some point, but everything is just very much in flux, and it's one of the biggest areas of big transition and rapid transition, not just in sports but maybe in society right now.
Right, and in one of the side scenarios was essentially the death of the RSN at this point.
Yes,
people
RIP.
were not willing to spend money on RSN anymore. And it's not shocking because we saw those deals. They were very cash heavy, but I think there's arguments made by economists and even local teams that said, like, this doesn't make financial sense for us because we don't own any of the commercial rights to all these. We cannot sell ads, essentially.
Right.
And the one thing with the DTC model is that now you get a place and a location. I mean, the biggest story really is this came from the Utah Jazz of all teams, where they were able, where their owner was able to create this sort of Jazz Plus platform that is the Utah Jazz. Essentially, he created the own channel essentially at the end of the day, and it feels like I think a lot of teams are going to go that way. They're going to take huge haircuts in revenue, but for a lot of these teams, these are almost billion-dollar entities. I would think I would rather want the ecosystem and the money.
Yeah.
Being able to sell products to these fans who we can automatically capture now.
That's right.
Like before you had to go searching for them. Now, I'll use the example, if you're a Utah Jazz fan or a Dallas Mavericks fan, you're subscribing to that service to watch the game. Because it's a cheaper alternative than anything else. So I think a lot of teams will embrace the DTC model. I don't know if it's going to be fully wide swung by 2030, but it would not shock me in my lifetime, where we start to see these teams claw these rights back. Yeah. And essentially own it for themselves just for the pure financial standpoint of it.
And in a sense, this is full circle, because if you go back to the earliest days of this program on the Sports Talk Network, here on America's North Coast, at that time you had Sports Time Ohio, which, again, the tribe brought their broadcast rights in-house, set up a cable channel, got carriage deals with the different entities in the state of Ohio, and that was mirrored in many other places. The YES Network still exists for the Yankees in the New York area, et cetera, et cetera. But what's happening is this is a model where it's not dependent on anybody giving you that carriage outside of there. This is something where we're in a world now where they're not, and I don't think they have been for years, making TVs that aren't at least smart enabled. You may not get a smart TV with every TV there, but it's at least got the HDMI to where you plug your thing in there. So whether you're using a Roku stick like this guy or whatever you're doing, you can pick up any of these things anywhere. So they're just bypassing the cable and satellite companies altogether. But it's the same thing we saw that, like, back in the late 2000s, we were like, this is the future of local team sports. Well, it was and it wasn't. Like going through another entity and having that, that wasn't the way to do it. Having the cable and the satellite channels carry you. That's where this is different. And this is a thing where now, as the NBA in particular is on the verge of its new broadcast paradigm. We talked about this before with Warner Media losing it. It goes to Amazon as part of the package next year. NBC/Peacock comes in, ESPN and ABC dealing with this the shrinkflation of pay more, get less, but they're still getting the lion's share of the deal. They're doing this at a point in time where they're going to be having to do this adjustment. And I've been seeing stories, as I'm sure you have recently, of like the NBA is now staring into a world where Steph and LeBron and Durant won't be the guys they're able to market around the most. And we're seeing a lot of that whole kind of thing. And where does it go from here? And not to be prisoner of the moment, but in the last week here, of course, my Cleveland Cavs, Oklahoma City Thunder, the most decorated records of two teams to meet this late in the season in a couple of decades. And it was something where I think the game pulled in. I think it was in excess of 2 million on ESPN the other night. So the NBA is going to be forced to go more in that direction anyways, of just trusting the stars on the different teams to be sort of be enough, whether it be Donovan Mitchell, whether it be SGA. You got Wemby, which is the big one, literally and figuratively, that everybody's fixating on. But this whole sort of transition that the media now seems focused on, and like it's going to have to move to a next crop of guys to get behind. That's very much underway, and we'll see how long it takes to fully get there.
Right. And again, ironically enough, and we'll say, Rick, the second lead in after that game essentially was Milwaukee and Giannis and Wemby and San Antonio. So those are two very polarizing guys. And we also have to consider the scenario, too. We're only a draft away from Cooper Flag going to the NBA, and he's going to be a polarizing figure, too. So it's, again, we saw the discussion of ratings, which was proven to be overblown. It's, again, down, but not as bad as everyone thought it was going to cascade. But it feels like, to me, the league now is trying to figure out where it's at right now. And again, we all notice in America, the NFL is still king. We saw those insane numbers that they put on Netflix for that Christmas doubleheader. And we're going to see later today, you can tell when we're recording this, that the
Saturday live to tape
game, Baltimore Ravens and the Pittsburgh Steelers is Amazon Prime exclusive. So one of my mini predictions I have is, at least in the next 4 to 5 years, all the other deals right now are essentially done, but there is a really interesting scenario with the NFL where they can opt out. I believe it's either 2028 or 2029, where they can opt out of that deal and renegotiate with everyone outside of Disney. So it would not shock me to see a conference championship, a playoff conference championship game on streaming only, potentially. We've seen it with the NBA now. It would not shock me that we could see an NFL game, a conference championship game on streaming. Exclusive.
And I'm going to reiterate something I said 5 years ago on the show when our panel was taking a look ahead to the overall 2020s. And I look back at a prediction that I made for the 2010s. And I was predicting that at a certain point here, maybe on the next TV deal, that the NFL would be going to almost exclusively, you look at the amount of money that Google has. Who has more money than them? Google, Amazon, whatever. There was going to be some kind of a thing where these giants of the internet were going to take it over, and where I was wrong. And I said, I figured out where I was wrong, and it's really fascinating. It's because the NFL staying on broadcast TV, that is a matter of existential survival for the affiliates. That basically, if you pull that out from underneath it, the chance to basically be able to promote things for the rest of the week. The NFL is a loss leader for these things here, but it's a very necessary loss leader. And being the biggest thing in America, you look at the fact that, again, Sunday Night Football. I've looked at this over a period of time. Like it used to be fascinating to look through the decades. Oh, what was the number one show this season, that season? You could really get a sense of what the zeitgeist was. That Sunday Night Football has been like the biggest show for like the last decade. Like it doesn't change year to year. So it was like the affiliates weren't going to let the networks.
The big thing right now is that it did lose some. Like the NFL lost some ground, but it's still, in terms of total TV ratings, had 70 of the top 100 shows in 2024.
It did.
And I don't think that's ever going to change just because of how the NFL is structured.
And
how these TV deals are structured. And I feel like, we're going to. The question is, and I think it's going to be a general question for Roger Goodell in the NFL, is when does fragmentation become too much? And it feels like for them right now, I don't think it's there yet, but it has the potential to get there because we've already seen the mini backlash of having playoff exclusive games on streaming services only.
Right.
And then also along the lines of seeing scenarios where if we enter an economy that's not strong, people just bypassing these services to save money.
Right. And as we are going live to tape here on the Saturday before our anniversary, January 14th, we don't yet have in the ratings for the national semifinals in football. But one of the things that's been established also, too, for the NBA that has been a lesson that has been, I think, proven this year that is not a kind one for the NBA is that really, if you look at college football as a separate entity, sports wise, the number 2 one in North America behind only the NFL. And we saw it this year. The long awaited, this was year 0. If we get to see the expanded playoff, we get to see the consolidation of the super conferences, all these changes, everything that is really still kind of a novelty at this point. It's going to be really interesting to see now that the conferences have always been the thing that have really kind of dictated the way the change goes in football. And it's because of the conferences. By the way, when there was still a Pac-12 that was the Pac-12 before the vivisection here, there's going to be a Pac-12 again, but it's going to be a glorified Mountain West plus some other stuff. That was when you had the 4 conferences getting buys in there, when it looked like there could be 4 conferences worthy of buys versus public pressure is going to be put the top 4 seeds in there. So what does that look like from here on in? When do they yield on that? That's going to be an interesting story for the rest of the decade as well.
I mean, the big thing, especially for the college football, and we saw the ratings. The ratings were insane for the Ohio State-Oregon game. Had over 26 million people watch a blowout. And then they also got great numbers for the Sugar Bowl as well, despite that game being played much earlier than initially scheduled. So ultimately, at the end of the day, especially for college football, they have, I think the playoff model is what they ultimately are going to get what they wanted from that playoff model. They got a lot more games that matter to a lot more people. It was cool to see early round playoff games being played essentially on the campuses. And at the period of time too is that if you just they can just make a tweak or two over the next couple of years. I feel like the way that the biggest thing that came from this Oregon played an Ohio State team who is now in the championship game, who was dramatically underseeded at the time. The big question is going to be will there be reseeding? Will there be a scenario where are the at-large teams always going to be conference champions? It's going to be very interesting to see. I think reseeding is the simplest thing because you can always explain away and say, hey, the NFL does it, so we can do it too.
Right.
Or along the lines too of we're going to see that the big thing that we learned for the college football playoff is that the first week of games really was not that great. They did okay ratings, but the games were terrible.
Right.
And then we started to see the incline now of all these games. And I think the national championship is probably going to do a fantastic number with Ohio State facing Notre Dame.
Yes.
So of all the scenarios, Rick, those are it's great for college football because I feel like there is more relevancy because let's be honest, even though bowl games have been up, I am a little skeptical more that those ratings really matter at this period of time.
Yeah. Well, and isn't it the Pop-Tart Bowl carrying the rest of them up there?
Yeah, the Mayo Bowl too. That's pretty much
it. So you got that happening, and then as we said in the news segment that we did here, sort of bring everything full circle on this one here. How's AI going to affect sports over the course of the next decade? That is something that I'm really looking at here as well, just to see how that kind of plays out and what ends up being. Does it really sort of tweak the analytics in the different sports as we're able to, get more into it?
The big thing with AI, especially with sports, I feel like one of the biggest things that we're going to see moving forward is just the ability, because one of the things we see with work and just stuff outside of sports is the ability for AI to break down information. And make it very quick because in the old days, again, it's not that far off ago in 1980s where you're printing out spreadsheets and having to go through typing just to produce these scouting reports, Rick.
Right.
And now you can literally have your opinion of a scout and an opinion of AI in the same timeline. So I don't think we've ever seen that before. But my biggest thing too, just in general, is that it's only going to make sports better. And it's also going to make the fan experience better too. Because the availability for all these AI tools, you're going to get people learning more about the game more than ever.
That is true. No question about it. That is true.
Most of us are gamblers, but what can you see?
Yes. That is going to be the case, and there are aspects of AI and sports watching that are going to tie into the final of our three mini episodes here on entertainment. So we'll just kind of leave you with that cliffhanger, and we'll pick it up in the next one here. Thank you so much, Ben, for being a part of this great series here with us to celebrate the 18th anniversary. And thank you, everyone, for checking out FDH Lounge mini episode 1801.